So our next speaker is a design evangelist at Adobe. She is a web animation expert and author with a talent for getting designers and developers alike excited about the power of animation. She speaks at conferences and workshops around the world to connect Adobe directly to the UX community, and here to speak to us today is Val Head.
Ooh, it works. Hi, everyone. How was lunch? Cool. I was really worried there'd be silence, and I'd be like, well, time to wake everyone up. Someone's got to do it. But yeah, thanks so much to Jesse and Elaine and everyone else on the team for having me at Layers. And when I found out I was going to be speaking here, everyone that I knew, well, not everyone, but like everyone who is designers, which is basically everyone, was like, it's the best conference, you're going to love it. And it's lived up to its expectations like 1,000,000,000%, especially the snacks, which I've basically been bragging about on every Slack I'm in since yesterday. So they're all just like, are you doing anything besides eating? And I'm like, nope. Definitely not. But today I want to totally geek out with you all about animation because it's one of my favorite things to just super nerd out about. And it's a thing that we see in like the products we use, even like the operating systems we use, maybe even the products you're designing. We see it all the time everywhere, but it's also a thing that I find designers just don't feel like they have a lot of confidence in working with. Like they feel like, I'm a designer, I can't do motion stuff. But oh, you can. You totally can. I believe in you all. As Jesse said, I'm a design advocate at Adobe, which means I get to talk to a lot of designers about what works in their process and what doesn't. Strangely, the conversation often turns to animation, probably because I wrote this book, because it has animation in the title, get it? So they're like, that's all you know. I'm like, yep, that's it, nothing else. Good thing this talk is about animation, or and we often start talking about animation and advice around that. I don't have the super dog gift talent that Kat had yesterday, but I do feel the need to point out that I did sneak photos of my dog into as many pages of this book as possible. And that's why you should all go and write books, to make people look at pictures of your pets. That's why it's done, right? We're both really terrible at selfies, but I think she's still the best. So one of the questions I get the most when it comes to animation is questions around like what makes good animation? Or more specifically, how do I know I'm doing good animation? And then like how do I talk about that in design critiques and like meetings, and how do I make other people understand that I'm doing good stuff? We question ourselves a lot as designers, don't we? And I've noticed that there's kind of two things that animations that are good, like those animations that we kind of don't even notice. Because I find that it's really easy for us to spot bad animation, right? Like probably maybe even today or yesterday at some point while you were using the internet, some giant pop-up came up and like flipped in 3D space and was like, join our newsletter. And you hadn't even read like one word of the article yet. Really? None of you have seen that recently? I'm in the wrong parts of the internet. We notice those things that stand out as like being bad and maybe like not a great experience and maybe not super well done because they stand out in that way. But we don't so often notice the stuff that's really good. Because in that sort of like, I don't even know who this is quoting, but the idea of that like good design is invisible. And when things fit together really well and the experience flows really well, we almost don't notice it. I think that's why it's harder to really pin down what makes good UI animation. Though I've kind of found there's two pieces to this puzzle. And they are this idea of having both purpose and style. That really good UI animation, the stuff that's so good you don't even notice it until you're obsessively looking for it because you've listened to someone like me, it has both of these things. And the purpose has to be user-focused purpose. The purpose can't be because like, I learned to spin stuff in 3D and I want to show off. Not a good purpose. Not for this anyways. I mean, there's times to do that, but maybe not in your particular product. The purpose is something that's there for the person using the application or using the product to make their experience better, to help them get a thing done. And the style side of it is kind of what we apply to all of our design decisions anyways. Like make it fit in with your type choices, your color choices, all those other design choices you made. You want it to fit with that same language and have that same feel and approach to things. So today I want to talk about three main things that we can help to find that purpose of animation, to help give all of you that confidence in working with motion, whether you've got it already or not. By the end of this talk, you totally will. They're not the only three things that animation can do in support of UX, but they're three of probably the most powerful ones, the ones people tend to use the most. And three is a good number. I hear that three is like, I don't know, you're supposed to make things happen in threes. That's what people told me. So three. First one is continuity, which is really about like spatial continuity. This idea that there are things that are maybe part of our interface, part of our application that are important and useful, but they can't all fit on the screen. I don't know if you've noticed, but the last few years, actually, I guess it's closer to a decade now, but time moves at a strange pace for me. There's things I'm like, it was yesterday, and people are like, that was 3 years ago. I'm like, whoops. I'm glad I'm not the only one. But we're designing things that need to be on screens of all sizes, like things that are this big, things that are like that big, things that are that tiny. Like, things need to fit in some really small spaces, and sometimes we can't fit all the most important information or all the information we need on screen. Generally, as the people designing or developing that thing, we have a sense of where things are. We know, and we can use animation to help convey that mental model to the people using our stuff. So one great example of this, and this is a pattern we see in many places, but I'm using Cotton Bureau as an example here. They make t-shirts that are fun. They have their navigation off to the left, and they have their cart off to the right. You can't see them right now, but when you go to use them, they come on screen with this nice little transition. They're like, hey, maybe, maybe not. Oh. Did I play the video and just not even know it? Possibly, maybe. Anyways, if this was playing, you would see some navigation sliding in from here. No, okay, I was thinking maybe it would happen just as I did that, and then it would slide back out. And then if you wanted to go use the shopping cart, it would slide in from here, and then it would slide back out. And those transitions would be very simple, so simple I can demonstrate them for you with just one hand at a time. But they convey so much information. They show you that in the sense that you see that menu coming on and going off, if the video worked. That's my fault, not yours. We get this sense of like, oh, the menu was living off screen and now it came into view. And the fact that you see it leave shows you that that's where it lives for when you need it later, creating that mental map of this physical space that's not really physical space. And just by having that transition, you eliminate all those questions and cognitive load around like, where the heck did that menu come from, or anything like that. Google Fonts does this as well in a slightly different way, where they have that little paint bucket icon up top that actually holds a bunch of colors in it. When you click on that, you can change the background of your type specimen by, oh really? This is how we're gonna do it, Keynote? All right. All right, so anyways, again, they have this little paint bucket, like palette come out from the paint bucket. It kind of comes out with a little scale, does a little spin, and you can change the color of your background. And through that animation that I just totally acted out for you, they create this sense that that color palette lives within the paint bucket itself. And even though we know that like pixels can't actually be inside pixels, because that's not how pixels work, they create that sense with emotion that that's where those colors live. So let's go on to feedback, which is our second one. And we'll see if these videos play. If not, I'm going to do something crazy like turn it off and on again. Let's see what happens. So feedback is a thing that we tend to use a lot when we are dealing with trying to help people see what's going on, the effects of their actions, and whether things are actually happening when they think they're happening. Pretty important stuff. A lot of the times we will use feedback for error states, like animation will be used specifically for feedback around error states. And that often takes a kind of physical approach where we sort of like do a little shake error thing like, no, silly human, you can't do that with a form. All right, Keynote, I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone, you're gonna have to watch me computer for a second. Let's see what happens if I just play it one more time. Nope. All right, one more thing. Dangerous times, everyone. You've all been like, I really wonder how she turns on stuff in her computer. How does she type? I've always wondered. No one has wondered that. It's all right, I am fully prepared to act out all of these videos if I have to. You are not owning me today, Keynote. This is my presentation. A dramatic reading of my inner thoughts. By Val Head. That will not be my next book, don't worry. All right, let's see, maybe. Yes, video! Woo! The animations get way more complicated. I'd probably have to use like my whole, you just don't want to see me do that. So we get in this physical sense of like, no human, you can't submit a blank form. Or even if you'd made smaller mistakes besides just doing that. And we see that pattern a lot where we get that kind of physical like, sort of thing. And oftentimes, or pretty much always, when it's done really well, animation is used as like a second layer or third layer in that feedback, where it's sort of like striped as here, where it's not just the animation, it's also the color to get that kind of multiple layers of feedback, which tends to work best, especially when you're giving someone bad news, like, no, not submitting that. We can also use animation to stack feedback in space instead of time, which sounds like fancy, like, I don't know, physics, but it's really not that complicated. If you've ever been to a site where you buy some stuff and you see all these little toasts coming up like, your order has been submitted, waiting for it to load, blah, 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 blah. We can do it that way in physical space. We can also have those things all come out over time, which is what Stripe does here with the submit button. And this submit button is both the submit button, the loading state, and the success state. So when you're like, yeah, let's donate some money, it's like, hold on, loading, 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 yay. Those sound effects are not part of that animation, those were mine. I'm gonna start a second career as a sound artist. If you need anyone to narrate your websites for you, yeah. But it's a really great way of fitting all that feedback in a very small space and also putting it in a place that's exactly where you'd be focused, right? If you're submitting a form, you're looking at the submit button, and it gives you all of that feedback right as it's happening. Or well, sort of while it's happening. That's a whole other story. Feedback doesn't have to always be super serious. We can use it to make interactions feel more substantial, like more of a thing. For example, on Medium, you can clap for articles that you like. You can clap, and there's all this, like, those little triangles come out, the numbers come out, and eventually you can also unclap, which is weird, but that's cool. I guess that's like playing it backwards in real life? I don't know. But that's a lot of animation happening with this interaction. And we don't necessarily need that feedback or all of that feedback to know that we've clicked a thing. We've all tapped on stuff. We know when it's happening. But those extra particles and those numbers coming out make that interaction feel much more powerful. And it makes sense because this is a really important interaction for having authors feel like their Medium articles got attention. They want that engagement of seeing people clap for their articles. You want clapping for someone's articles to feel like a thing because you're like, yes, good job. And the animation in this particular interaction really helps make that feel like more of a thing. Of course, it can be serious. We can do things like change the way we pull up the organization of documents. And this is Google Docs. You've maybe seen it. And when you go and reorganize documents, there's actually a lot of animation helping you along the way. So if you go and select a bunch of documents, you're like, yay, cool. It kind of sucks them up into a pile. And you're like, you got 4. And then you get some information around through animation of where you're allowed to drop it. And when you finally do drop it, they all go back in 3D space. Very material. Yeah, see, it's a material design joke, get it? Yeah. I've learned that when you explain the joke, no. But that's actually some of the most complex animation we've seen today, right? Like the Cotton Bureau stuff was a very simple translation on one axis. We had a little bit of scaling going on, but this one actually happens in 3D space, and it gets very complex. But yet that entire time, it's actually moving with you while you're reorganizing your documents. It's giving you feedback along the way, guiding that task, but you're never left waiting for the animation to finish, which makes it so much more impressive when you realize what's going on because you start obsessing over the animations like me. This can work really great for physical products too. For example, this remote right here, where as you're using it and they show you how to charge it and they show you how to plug in the little dongle thing and how to get it started, they have this whole animation that goes along with it and leads you through the actual physical actions of using the remote. Really effective and this is the most interesting remote I've ever used in my life. So we can also use animation to direct attention. And this is one of those things that can be super powerful and is also the thing that kind of gets, or at least in the past, I think, got animation a bad reputation. If you know anyone who's like, animation is always distracting and bad, it's probably because they've only ever seen animation used to actually distract them. If you think of banner ads and how those were often animated, and usually they're animating over here on the side, and you're trying to read this thing over here, and you're like, why am I looking at that? Oh, stop. And we can't, because that's just how our brains work. We're there's a thing moving in our peripheral vision, must look. You're like, I don't want a discount on my mortgage, whatever. And if that's the only animation you've been exposed to, you're like, well, animation is always distracting. Because in that case, they're trying to pull your attention to a thing you don't care about. The dancing banana mortgage ad, you don't care. The article you do care about, but it's pulling your attention over there. But what if we use that attention-grabbing power of animation to match it with something people actually care about instead of trying to distract them? Suddenly that power becomes not distracting, but actually useful. One of my favorite examples of this is in CodePen, where if you've never used it before, you write some little code on one side. It can also be big code, whatever size of code you like to write, it's fine. And then you get a little preview on the other side in real time. But it's all in the browser, which means if you don't save your stuff and you just close your browser or something bad happens with your browser, you could lose all of your work, and that sucks. So if you're typing some things and you haven't saved for a while or turned on autosave, it starts shaking the save button at you. It's like, hey, you should save. If you wait longer, because you're someone like me that's like, what happens if I really don't save and just keep going? It's like, please save. And eventually it's like, please save your work. It gets very dramatic. And if that like shaky hover animation happened every time we went, or happened on every time we hovered over this entire navigation, we would hate it and never use it, and it would be terrible. It would be a poor design choice. But the fact that this large amount of animation is paired with the thing we care about, like not losing our work, we care a lot about that, it fits in that context, and then it feels appropriate, and you're like, oh, thank you for helping me not lose my work. One of the other questions I get a lot around animation is this one of like, how do I know when I've got too much animation? How do I know when I've pushed it too far, it's too many, or it's over the top? And oftentimes I feel like people want an answer from me of like, it's 4. But it's just not that easy. It's like 4 animations and just stop. It's really like, it's not that, that cut and dry. It really comes down to context and what you're convey and what the purpose is for that particular animation, which starts sounding like a lot of the decisions we make around like type and color and layout and all of those other things, doesn't it? So we see a pattern similar to this for something like notifications. We see it like Facebook Messenger, pretty much anything we get notifications, whereas notifications come in, get a little bell icon animating to let us know we've got new messages. This particular one is from Stripe Dashboard, but we see a similar pattern in other places as well. And in this case, messages are important, right? That this may be someone requesting a refund, or maybe you got a big deposit, who knows? But it's not important enough for like that little bell icon to just keep ringing and never ever stop, because maybe what you're doing is more important. But they've done a really good job of balancing the importance of that information that they're giving you, of like, hey, you got new messages, have your attention come over here, with the context of what's going on. So the idea of what's too much and what's just enough is very dependent on context and depending on what it is you're trying to convey and when. So to get a little bit into style, I said we were going to focus mostly on purpose, but I want to touch just a bit on style as well. A lot of the things around style are really very brand and personality specific, because they're around things like the timing and easing that you use for an animation, which can be very personal to your particular product and brand. But I think there's some baseline choreography stuff that helps us like have motion that looks good and applies pretty much across the board. So in choreography, just being like how we make stuff move on screen, like just like making it move and not paying attention to how it moves isn't really doing things with style. It's not really designing it. So one thing that's really helpful is to have things slow down before they stop. In the real world, if you were walking somewhere or running somewhere and you didn't slow down before you stopped, something very bad is happening to you. You're running into a wall, or like the floor just evaporated around you. I don't know, it's a disaster, whatever it is. And that's the kind of expectations we have around real world objects. Most things in the real world have to accelerate into their action and have to slow down before they stop. So when we do that on screen as well, it helps things feel a little bit more natural, a little more familiar, more like they're acting the way they're supposed to be. One of my very, most, I guess this is like my best tip for animation. I should probably have given it a bit more lead up. That's okay, it's all right. If you want to look like you know how to do motion really good, or you want to impress like your motion graphics friends, overlap your actions. So a lot of times if we have like 5 things to bring onto the screen, we'll do it like this. We'll be like 1, 2, oh, did I hit the button? We're like, 1, oh, no, really? Yeah, like that. We're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where second one doesn't start until the first one is done. You're like 1 thing, 2 thing, 3 thing. I can count to 5, you probably can too. But if instead of having things wait for the one before them to finish, we actually overlap their actions, so number 2 comes in before number 1 starts, or stops rather, we end up with something that looks more like that. And then we have this nice like organic arc to the motion. It happens faster, might even be better for performance depending on what platform you're making this for, all sorts of bonuses, and it generally always looks a lot better. And we see this kind of stuff in things like Facebook reactions, pretty much anything that brings in a list of stuff. They don't even have to be circles, works on any shape. So yeah, go impress all your motion design friends at work tomorrow. Be like, look what I learned. And if they're not impressed, well, just do it anyways. So another thing that is, I think, really important for choreography that we often break because we're like, oh, it's just not interesting enough, right? Like having similar objects and move in similar ways sounds almost like super obvious. Like you're like, why is that even on a slide? If we design navigation, or if we design like a series of buttons for our entire application, we're generally going to have like all the buttons will have maybe similar kind of rounded corners. They'll probably have similar colors, similar type. There'll be a lot of things they have in common to show that they're a button, no matter what size they are or what their label is. And we can use that same idea with animation as well. If things are the same kind of thing, they should move in the same way. So maybe if we wanted to bring a bunch of thumbnails into this little situation, we might do it like this. We have one come at a time, like dun, dun, dun. Each one, I overlap that action too, just reinforce the last slide. But they each slide in, they do their thing, and they all move in the same way. But sometimes we see stuff like that and we're like, oh, it's just not interesting enough or something, and maybe we decide to do something like this instead. Or it's like all of those things move in different ways. Suddenly it's very hard to follow with your eye because you're like, blah, 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 what just happened? And then you have to ask yourself that question as the person using this, like, are those all the same thing? Why did one flip and one came from the left and one came from the right? Are these different? Are they not the same like they look like? So by using that kind of consistent motion and making things that are similar move in the same ways, we can eliminate all those extra questions and just make it very obvious what things are. So that's my advice for you around having purpose and style for your animations, and I hope it's giving you a little more confidence for how to talk about animation and go use it in your own work. Because I really feel like if you're designers and you can handle things like type and color, you can do a good job with motion too. It's just a matter of thinking of it in those same terms. So I have a newsletter. If you like to be reminded about animation, like every Friday or so, I can be that person for you. Always happy to talk about this stuff like anytime as well. Even things around bigger things about animation of like accessibility, design systems, all that stuff. I will nerd out about any kind of animation you'd like to nerd out about. And with that, thanks so much for listening.